Hello and welcome. Good morning, good day, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from the world today. It's a pleasure to have you with us for today's webinar. Do management system standards and certification really improve performance? What an exciting area to explore. So before I do introductions and get us into the detail of today's session, just a few housekeeping points. So you've joined a muted webinar, which means that you should be able to hear us clearly, but we can't hear you. But that doesn't mean that we don't want to hear from you. We'd love to have your questions. So you'll see in your control panel, there is a question box, a chat box for want of a better word. Please submit your questions there. We are aiming to have plenty of time at the end of today's session to cover any questions, and I'll be keeping an eye on them during the session, and see if we can pull any out as we go along. You will receive a recording of this webinar probably early next week, and we'd encourage you to share that with your colleagues and people who may be interested. And with that, you'll also get links to some further information. But for today, we've already attached some documents that you may want to download now, and you'll see those again in your control panel in the handout section. So I have huge pleasure to introduce our two guest speakers. So I'm going to start with Dave, and I've got your bio here, Dave, which is, I always love reading bios. It's always such good fun. Dave is a principal consultant and BSI Consulting Regional Practice Leader for Sustainability and Management Systems, and is located in Portland, Oregon. An EHS and sustainability focused practitioner with over 40 years of experience in corporate governance and environmental health and safety compliance issues, Dave has supported a wide variety of clients in providing EHS management system and supply responsibility audit support. Dave has deep track record of success in leading organisations in leveraging, no less, regulatory compliance and organisational risk, implementing environmental, social and governance initiative, and identifying methods and practices to reduce waste in production of consumer and industrial goods. As a qualified ISO 14001 and ISO 45003 lead auditor, he's an accomplished in public-private sector ISO-based EHS management systems. He has 9 years of experience with BSI and has focused on responsible supply chain management, circular economy, and life cycle based approaches of production and manufacturing, comprehensive EHS auditing and compliance, including performance EHS assessments throughout the US, Canada, and Western Europe. So it's a pleasure to have you, Dave, here on today's session. Thank you very much. And my huge pleasure to introduce Mike Toffel, who's a professor from Harvard Business School. And a faculty chair of the HBS Business and Environmental Initiative. And Mike is one of the authors of the research that we will be discussing today. So thrilled that he can join us and you'll hear it firsthand. And Mike's research examines how companies manage environmental impacts and working conditions in their operations and supply chains, including the use of management system standards and supply codes of conducts. He also studies corporate decarbonisation approaches, how to make environmental and safety regulators and auditors more effective, and the drivers and consequences of CEO activism. And I wonder if that will come up today because it came up this morning, interestingly. Mike hosts the HBS Climate Rising podcast and created their HBS Working Conditions in Supply Chain Microsites to bring research insights to managers. So welcome, Dave and Mike. And my name is Kate Field. I'm the Global Head of Health, Safety and Wellbeing. And I had the honour to be recognised as one of the most influential individuals in health and safety last year. and I operate in BSI as the health, safety and global and wellbeing expert and I have over 20 years experience across all sectors, from the implementation and the auditing of management systems. So I've been where Mike is, and I've done those things, but my role now is really to drive BSI's global strategy for supporting you, our clients and our organisations, in creating a safer, healthier, fairer and more inclusive workplace. And my career started as a regulator, so working for the HSE in the UK, and then I moved into consultancy and through a range of roles across, as I've said, all sectors, public, private, charity sectors, big, small, the whole gambit, and internationally. And my passion is about driving cultural change that puts trust, engagement and well-being at the forefront, and hopefully inspiring others to do the same. So that's a little bit of context and who your hosts are and speakers are for today's session. So for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with BSI, I'll just give a very quick overview. So we are the creator of standards. Hopefully you'll love them. And hopefully certainly by today you love them. And BSI, the creator, we created the world's first standard back in 1901, and we are the founding member of the International Standards Organization, ISO. And the thing that I'm most passionate about in terms of being at BSI is that we are a purpose-driven organisation. We are driven by what is called a Royal Charter. You might not have come across this before, but it's really enshrining what we are here to do as an organisation, and that is simply to make the world a better place, which is a fantastic thing to be part of and be able to help and support. And, you know, as part of that, what we do now today is really help and support and drive positive change and help establish greater trust between all of the stakeholders that we might engage with, you know, from employees we might be talking around today, but academics, researchers, experts, industry, NGOs, the whole ecosystem to drive that value and improvement for society. And our strategic themes enable us to do that. And we have a specific focus on digital trust, sustainability, innovation, as well as what we're talking about today, health and safety and quality is still at our heart. So without further ado, I'll just set some context before we get into the details in terms of the research. And I think one of the things that, you know, without a doubt, the last 2.5 years, goodness me, it's racing on, is the pandemic has really created a renewed focus on trust and looking after people. And I think it was, you know, this kind of real change where the corporate world rediscovered its humanity. You know, those hierarchical barriers, you know, them and us, were completely broken down because we were suddenly all in the same situation together. You can see all three of us are working from home today. You know, we had our CEOs and our CFOs, and everyone was suddenly in this position and having to deal with this phenomenal period of change. You know, we had our cats and our dogs jumping on us and joining us in webinars, and our children coming to say hello to show their homework, and not to mention, you know, maybe not appropriately dressed friends and relatives in the background. So it really broke down those barriers and created this culture of care and this kind of humanity that I think had really been lost from the corporate world. And one of the things that was really interesting, you know, as well as this renewal in terms of culture of care, was BSI run an organisational index report every year. So there's a framework about what organisations need to do to be resilient, to cope with these changes, to not only survive but thrive during those changes. And one of the things that came out very strongly in the 2021 report, so this is kind of the first 12 months of dealing with the pandemic, was that those organisations that had prioritised their people, had really focused on looking after their people, were the ones that were doing the best, were not only surviving but actually thriving and looking for future opportunity, as well as just kind of a lot of organisations were just trying to cope and get through this period. And I think it was a really nice quote actually that we had from 2021 from a senior leader from an organisation in the USA. In terms of uncertainty or trouble, people turn and look to their leaders. So you have to have some emotional intelligence. You have to be empathetic. You have to communicate. Even if you don't know the answer, you need to acknowledge what's happening and communicate that. And I think that is a really powerful statement. And what's interesting, we're just about to launch the 2022 Organisational Resilience Index. And that report again highlights the need to continue to prioritise people to really not only survive, but really thrive. So when we're thinking about creating a culture of trust, what is it that we need to do? What does that look like? You know, I'm talking to a lot of clients at the moment, and they've got this real focus. Well, what is a culture of trust, particularly for those organizations who are still grappling with how do we manage hybrid working? How do we create a positive culture if nobody's in the office and actually seeing each other face to face? What does that look like? What do we need to do? And there are some key areas that you need to consider. So we already heard it from that quote, you know, you need emotionally intelligent leadership that creates collaboration and a clear communication. You need a diverse, inclusive and ethical workplace that is driving positive relationships based on respect and fairness. You need to think about opportunities for lifelong learning and education and growing. You know, as human beings, we like that opportunity. We like to have recognition for when we're doing a good job. And I think we've seen this. That's not just about pay. You know, the Great Resignation we've seen wasn't about pay. It was about people not feeling appreciated. The simplicity of a thank you goes a long way and was really overlooked. And also there's a really important part in terms of creating social value and engaging with the community and thinking about what that looks like. But a really fundamental part of creating a culture of trust is ensuring that work and workplaces prevent physical and mental harm and promote good physical and psychological safety. And that's what we're going to be focused on today. For those of you who want to explore all of the elements that you need to create a culture of trust, then BSI has developed a best practice framework that brings all of those elements together and gives you a roadmap in terms of what you need to do. And one of the documents you can download explains more about that model, which is BSI's Prioritising People model. And for those of you who've maybe spotted it, it's inspired based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You know, we need to get the basics right, the foundations to create safety and a feeling of safety before we can allow and give the opportunity people to grow. And, you know, that basic safety includes occupational health and safety. So that is our scene setting for today's session, but we'd really love to hear from you to get us going. And we have a poll. So a sneak peek about what we might be talking about today in terms of management systems, and 45001 is the occupational health and safety management system. So we'd really love to hear from you what you think are the potential benefits, the anticipated benefits of implementing a management system like ISO 45001, and you can tick all that apply. So do you think it's about reducing accidents, improving compliance, improve internal business confidence, improve employee or customer satisfaction? Is it about improving business reputation? So it would be really great to hear from you and get your results on that. And then Dave, so you have a chance to prepare yourself, then we'll be moving to you to start to give your thoughts and views around your experiences about why organisations look to management systems and implement them. So how are we getting on and see the results? Okay, great. So really powerful across the board, a fairly even split actually, in terms of what our listeners, our viewers, think the anticipated benefits are. So that's a really great place to kick us off. And Dave, I will move on to the next slide.
Great.
And if you'd like to talk to us about what your findings are in terms of why organizations use management system standards.
Thanks so much, Kate. And first of all, I'm really happy to be part of this conversation because many years ago, and all through the last 25 years since I've been doing management systems work, a lot of customers have come to us saying, why is this important? Why would management systems help improve our organization? Are there any studies that actually demonstrate that? And quite often, early on in the process, way back in the 1990s, when I started doing ISO 14001 and OSAS 18001 work, all I could say was trust the process. But I think we've got some good studies that Mike is going to share today that would help to bolster that. And I would also say that here's some key topics that I've learned in working with a variety of organizations through the years that have implemented safety management systems, whether they're based on OSAS 18001, ISO 45001, or something similar to that, like ANSI Z10 or VPP even, which Mike's study talks about. It definitely shows that by implementing proactive safety management, you can really reduce your healthcare costs. At the same time, it has the opportunity to reduce environmental impacts and overall improve productivity, increase efficiency in the workplace, and improve product and service quality. This is a real important point, is that a lot of organizations want to retain staff. And so if staff feel that at the end of the day, they can safely walk home with all the digits on their fingers, that they'll have enhanced morale, and staff retention actually has been able to be demonstrated. And it strengthens the company image and aids in competitiveness in the marketplace. We're seeing a lot of changes that have been going on in this, particularly with the advent of sustainability and environmental social governance. There are wellness and safety metrics associated with implementing those types of initiatives that drive safety performance. And overall, it adds up to reduction of risk. And that's really what this is all about, is leveraging organizational risk and providing a safer workplace. I've just read recently that the average workers' comp claim is around $40,000. So if you think about the number of accidents and incidents, even those that are occurring right now as we speak in industry during the course of this hour, that's $40,000 off out of a company's profits, basically. But more importantly, you're helping to promote safety in the workplace, to make sure that everybody can adequately do their work and feel safe in doing that work. Why don't you go ahead to the next slide? Back one. There we go. Thank you so much. I've
Delay.
often been asked about how management systems can improve safety culture as well. Many organizations, they often come to us and they're not even sure that they've got all of their safety ducks in order, basically. They're working towards compliance. They have very few written programs, very little or no professional safety management on site. And they're really struggling to stay in shape when it comes to safety performance. We've seen organizations that have come to us because they've had safety incidents and really want to correct that. Or in a worst case scenario, they've had to respond to an OSHA complaint or an OSHA incident, which is unfortunate. Please go back one slide. Thank you. Then other companies, as they start to achieve compliance, this is where they start thinking about management systems approaches. And these types of companies, as you move into compliance and basic management systems, these types of companies may already have ISO 14001 environmental management systems in place or quality management systems in place. We're seeing a lot of organizations that are using those two types of management systems to leverage adding another layer around safety to support proactive safety management within the organization. This is where ISO 45001 and previously OSAS 18001 came into play, where behavior-based safety became an important element of supporting safety in the workplace. And we've seen then that once these types of management systems can be put into place, it almost becomes self-perpetuating, that with increased worker participation, increased leadership presence, and also supply chain pressures as well from customers requiring that their suppliers have a very good safety programs in place. It almost self-perpetuates, and it becomes part of the culture of the organization as a whole. A lot of the larger organizations that we've worked with over the years that have implemented very high-level corporate programs that have driven down safety initiatives through their organizations have really taken a sector leader, best-in-class uh, 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 position at this point, because they've recognized the importance of safety in the workplace and driving a zero incident type of culture within the organization. And it really starts with worker participation, and I'll talk about that a little bit later when I get into my tips. Now you can go to the next slide. So safety management systems as a solution is really a business-like approach to safety and environmental management, I would also add. It's rather than bolting safety on to organizational operational processes, it's really embedded within the entire organization. And through the implementation of more data analytics, more EHS data that's really driving how organizations can improve and continually improve and set better goals for themselves and measure performance. It's really engaged management in a way that I've really never seen before in my 40 years in the business, and it's really pushing this in, much deeper into the marketplace than I've ever seen. And I think there's one more slide if you could just advance. So the next thing that that I just want to talk about, and then we'll turn it over to you, is how companies are going beyond compliance, beyond typical OSHA compliance to proactive safety management. And I do want to point out that here in the U.S., OSHA does have a safety and health management system process. It's outlined in a guidance that they have, which really focuses on achieving goals, monitoring performance, evaluating safety outcomes. But one of the important elements around that, and you can see on the graphic the key elements within that plan, do, check, correct process that's very similar to OSAS 18001 and ISO 45001, is that it's really focused on communication, both up and down and across the organization, and engaging not just from the leadership perspective, but engaging everybody in a way that creates an opportunity for everybody to participate and have buy-in into the safety management process. We've really seen that that's a key element to the success of any safety management system, where the rank and file in an organization feels heard, and that they feel valued in a way that supports the organization as a whole, so everybody can feel empowered to report their concerns. And that's the one thing, particularly in the last year, that I've seen a lot of organizations move towards by implementing opportunities for workers to report concerns without the fear of being penalized, more near miss reports than I've ever seen before in most organizations as well. So that drives improvement in performance. So I think what Mike is going to talk about is going to be able to demonstrate that safety management systems truly can have a benefit. And I'm excited to hear what he's got to say.
Lovely, great. Thank you, Dave. And Mike, I'll be handing over to you very, very shortly. But I thought it was just reflecting on, we ask our clients who we work with, why they choose to implement and get certification to ISO 45001. And you can see, and it unsurprisingly matches our initial poll, and the feedback is very clear in terms of the benefits that it gives. Of course, it's about risk management and proactive risk management, and that's not just reducing incidents. It's about taking a proactive approach, and that comes back to the culture of the organisation. It does help comply with legislation. There's a whole process for demonstrating that you understand what the legislation is and how you are complying with it. It does provide that internal business confidence. It does improve customer satisfaction, and by customers that does include employee engagement, as Dave said, and that I started with in terms of thinking about the culture is hugely important. And it has a huge benefit and impact on reputation. And Dave touched on, as more organisations get focused on ESG reporting, we have shareholders asking those questions about, what are they doing to look after their people, then you see that benefit come through. So I'm going to hand over to Mike to talk about his study and set the context. But just before we do, it's worth just reminding everybody about the journey from 18,001 to ISO 45001 and the other predecessors, some of which Dave mentioned. So there wasn't an international health and safety management system until 2008 when ISO 45001 was published. But there was a global recognition that OSAS 18001, and I'm really proud to say that that is a British standard. We created and developed the first management system standard, was written, and that is the foundation for ISO 45001. So when ISO 45000 was published in 2018, that became the world's first fully international standard. And when that was published, 18001 was withdrawn as an active standard. So I'm sure some of you listening will have been on the journey from 18001 to 45001, but it is just worth bearing in mind that 18001 is no more, if you like, and is fully replaced by 45001. And we'll have a bit of a chat about some of the differences and what that might mean for Mike's study. But without further ado, Mike, would you like to take us through your study?
Great, thank you, Kate, and thanks for arranging to have me here to present on your webinar series. So I'm here to present a paper that I've worked on with a few co-authors, and we've looked at the question overall of the safety performance implications of OSAS 18001 certification on establishments in the United States. So again, two main research questions that we're looking at are looking at the time of certification. Did those establishments that got certified have safer workplaces than those that aren't getting certified at the same time, compared to others in their industry of comparable size and so on? That's the first question. The second question is, once you've become certified, in the subsequent years as you operate as a certified entity, do your safety trends differ from other establishments that looked similar to you at the time of certification, but chose not to get certified? So those are the two questions, and we're going to talk about them one by one. But first, I wanted to back up and elaborate a little bit on what Kate was just saying. Like right now, you can't even get certified to OSAS 18001 anymore. So how is this study relevant to those of you who are interested in safety management systems? Really, the key factor is that ISO 45001 is based very much on the foundation of OSAS 18001. So much so that, of course, there's this transition process that you're going on, and I think lots of people are quite convinced that ISO 45001 is a bigger and better standard than 18001 was, as good as it was. So this will hopefully give you some insight as to what we can expect from the performance implications of 45001. Also, pragmatically, it's too early to study the implications of ISO 45001 because we don't have enough years of experience of it being in the marketplace. So we have a lot of pre-data of, say, safety performance, but we don't yet have years of post data. So in a couple of years, hopefully we'll be able to get access to this data so that we can actually run a study on ISO 45001. For now, it's just too early. Why study this in the US versus any other country or a global setting? Here, this is just a fact of data. So in order to do a systematic study, you need the same type of safety indicators for all the establishments that you're looking at. Again, before certification, after certification, for those that were certified, for those that weren't certified, or maybe never will get certified. And getting that access to that data at the establishment level, these are not just averages by industry, which you can get in many countries. Getting the establishment level data is actually quite tricky. So it turns out that in the US, the Bureau of Labor Statistics collects this data periodically from a number of workplaces and make it available to researchers who fill out what seems like 1,000 forms. And it takes about 2 years to get access to it, but we were able to accomplish that. So the performance data is available in the US, not elsewhere. But the US, I want to be clear, the US represents a very small percentage of most management system certifications, right? By my calculations, roughly 2 to 5% of global certifications of ISO 9000, ISO 45000, ISO 14000 are US entities. So this is a small slice of the global pie. And it's our sense that the incremental benefit that you might see in the US might actually be an underestimate of some of the benefits you'd see in other countries, especially other countries that have less regulatory infrastructure, where this becomes kind of a substitute for that regulatory infrastructure. Here, we're layering it on top of a robust regulatory infrastructure as we would in other countries like in Europe, for example. Okay, so that's a little bit of a setup on why OSAS 18001 and why the US. All right, so now I'm going to speak to the research findings of that first question. The first question, just to remind you, I put it here in red, did safer workplaces in the US get certified to OSAS 18001? So here we have collected data from about 10 certification bodies who gave us the data of their entire list of facilities who got certified to OSAS 18001 in the US at all, ever, up to when OSAS was retired. And they also gave us information on ISO 14001 and ISO 9000, which we sort of account for as control variables. And we compare those 300, roughly 300, that we could match to this safety data. So there were many more that OSAS certified establishments that we got from these certification bodies. We had to link it to the safety data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We also linked it to S&P data so we can identify what industry they're in, how many employees they have, to account for all those factors. Once we did that, we were down to about 300 certified establishments. We compared them to everyone else in the sample, again, controlling for things like industry, size, age of the plant, and so on. And the key finding here is that indeed safer workplaces did get certified to OSAS 18001. Again, this is taking a snapshot at the moment of certification, comparing it to others in that year, in that industry, and so on. To give some number to that, this is a little tricky to interpret, but each additional injury or illness case in the 2-year period leading up to certification was corresponding to roughly a 20% decline in the odds of getting certified. Okay, that's a bit of a mouthful. We put a graph together here that shows there's like a curve. So it's to the left, or how many injuries and illness cases did you have according to the data in the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 0 to 9. And you can see the diminishment in the chances you're going to seek certification as your injury count goes up, right? So, or put another way, As your injuries get fewer, moving from right to left on the graph, the odds of getting certified increase. Importantly, we had lots of different intensities of injuries in the data. We had, and we would decompose this effect to see, are these the trivial injuries and illnesses, or are these the actual severe ones? And it turns out here, this finding is driven by the most severe types of injuries in our data. Those are the injuries and illness cases that correspond to days away from work. So most of you, I think, on the call are safety folks. That's an intuitive thing. You understand what that means. It means these are not paperwork injuries. These are not paper cuts. These are serious injuries that actually require you to be away from your primary task. So I'll come back to you in a little while with research question 2 of what happens once you've been certified. But back to you, Kate.
Lovely. Thanks, Mike. And I think this is really interesting. It touches on what we heard from Dave in terms of this kind of maturity journey. You know, a lot of organizations, you know, will start, whether because they're small or they grow or they just, you know, change of management or whatever it happens to be, you know, they start the journey just focused on compliance, and they start to see the need and the benefit of implementing a management system approach. And as they do that, they start to see the benefits. And I think that then builds confidence and that then desire to demonstrate both sort of, you know, to internal stakeholders, but also to external stakeholders that this is something you're getting right. So I think, you know, that very matches, if you like, boots on the ground experience from my experience and what we've heard from Dave. So it'd be really great to hear from you on our next poll. If you can launch that, please, Chloe. So it would be really interesting to hear whether your organisation has implemented ISO 45001. So not certification. We're going to ask that question later when we hear about the certification journey from Mike. But are you using ISO 45001? And it may be that you've implemented it across the entirety of your organisation. And David, who's asked a question, has asked a kind of a question around, you know, do you have one management system for one site and another for another, and how does it work? So we'll come back to that in more detail. But have you implemented 45001, if you like, over the entirety of your organization? Have you maybe started your journey and implemented it on 1 or 2 sites, but not the rest of the organization? You haven't started implementing it, but you are planning to do so. Maybe you weren't planning on using ISO 45001, but perhaps you're starting to reconsider from what you've heard so far. And maybe you've got still no plans to implement 45001. So it'd be really interesting to hear from you in terms of what your journey is looking like. And then I'll be handing to Dave, and I'm conscious of time, Dave. So perhaps a really brief summary in terms of kind of how, once you've implemented 45001, how you continue to get the benefit, what that continuous improvement looks like. So if we can have the results, I'd be really curious to see what that is. Okay, so we've got most of our listeners have implemented 45001. We've got quite a few, similar number in total, either partially or looking to go on that journey. We've got some of you who weren't, who may be starting to think about it, and still some people thinking, nah, maybe it's not for us. So we'll see what the rest of the session has to say, and see whether we convince you otherwise. So Dave, really briefly, if I may, how, once you've started that journey, how do you keep getting the benefit?
Well, I won't walk through the orderly method to keep your SMS on track. You can take a look at that. But I jotted down some things that I think are really relevant that indicate what I would call best tips that organizations that have implemented either 45,001 or 18,001 previously. You want to really have a very strong change management process in your organization. And you can leverage your quality management system or your environmental management system, but change happens within manufacturing environments all the time. So it's vital that safety professionals be part of that process, so you can design for sustainability using your hierarchy of controls, building in the engineering and administrative controls up front when changes are planned in the process. And, and and along with that, you want to make sure that job safety assessments become a central focus of your safety management system. Do your job, your hazard assessments, your job safety assessments at all times, and make it dynamic, because things change in a workplace all the time. That's going to be the key to prevent accidents from happening in the first place. Don't forget about your contractors. There's a lot of contractors that come and work on site, and we've seen plenty of cases where the accidents and incidents that occur in manufacturing environments actually occur by contractors as well. And drive employee participation, which I've talked about. If you drive employee participation, that's going to drive safety culture. And then finally, top management needs to be involved. They need to be engaged in this process to make it work. Make sure that it's a top down, middle out, bottom up sort of communication process. And then when you're measuring how well your safety is actually doing, a lot of organizations focus on the lagging indicators, the DART reports, the DART stats, the TRIRs, but focus on some of the leading indicators as well. Those are very important aspects of how you can look at your safety programs through, let's say, number of training hours per employee. And training is very vital to the success of any management system, be it safety or environmental or others. So those are some key tips, but just keep that SMS on track. Always look at where you're at, where you desire to be, and figure out how you're going to get there by following some of the ideas that I've laid out on my graphic right there.
Lovely. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks.
And I know that we're going to hear from Mike shortly about the second question, which is going to look at certification. And I think for a lot of organisations, this idea about certification is really scary. Ooh, certification, that's really scary. What does that involve? What does that look like? And it's not, you know, the journey that you've gone through in terms of implementation. It's a very similar journey in terms of the certification. So you'll be really familiar, you should be really confident. You know, you will have started about thinking about, right, what have we got against what do we need? So your gap assessment, and that's a really good place to start for your certification. Actually, you know, you've implemented it. Is it fully matching up? Where are you? What do you need to look at or revisit? You know, there'll be a training element, and depending how far you are, you know, less or more, depending where you are on your journey. And then it's really starting to look at what the system and the process is. You know, it's not about having paperwork for the sake of paperwork, but there is a structure that's needed. There is some documented information is needed. Have you got that? Is it ready? Is it in the right format? And then once you're actually ready to go on and take that final step in terms of actual certification, again, it's not kind of it's not like an exam that you risk taking it once and then failing. It's designed to help and support you through that journey. So it's actually a two-stage journey. So it starts with stage one, where an auditor will come on site or do it remotely. Beauty of technology now, we do a lot of our audits remotely, and kind of look at your systems, look at that documentation, and see kind of whether the fundamentals are there and whether you're ready. And if at that point we've got confidence and you've got confidence, then we go for the certification, which will be a series of audits to really start to look at, yes, have you got the systems, but are they working? Are they delivering what it is that you want to get out of this? Are they making your workplaces safer and healthier for people? And that involves a lot of not just looking at the paperwork. Again, I think that's a myth, but talking to people, talking to your senior leadership, talking to people on the shop floor. Are you living and breathing what you're saying in your safety management system? So hopefully that's demystified a little bit the process. And Mike, would you like to talk us through the second question? If the
Sure.
slide
Thanks.
will click on in a minute. It's very delayed.
All right. So the second question is, again, looking at the period during which establishments are certified and comparing that to the years before they were certified. and comparing that pre and post to a matched group of establishments that look similar in the certification year to those that got certified, but did not in fact get certified. So that's a treatment group, which are the certified, and a control group that are the uncertified. So we go through a process, what's called matching, where you try and find for everyone who got certified, find someone who's similar to them that didn't get certified, and then look several years back at their annual safety performance, and then look several years after the certification breakpoint and see is there a difference in trends. And so that's the approach we used. And it turns out the answer is yes. Certification led to a 20% decline in the number of injury and illness cases, again, reported through the BLS data, compared to this matched sample. And again, we broke it out to say, are these the most important injuries? Are they the least important, the more trivial injuries? And it turns out this 20% held roughly constant. It was somewhere between 18 and 22% when we divided it up by these different types of injuries. So it does seem to hold a roughly 20% value across these different levels of severities. So we're going ahead and doing some additional analysis to look to see what other outcomes might be affected by certification, including things like growth and employment. Do these workplaces grow faster than non-certified? If they're getting more business, are they more likely to stay in business compared to businesses that close down? Is there any signal being sent to regulators, OSHA or state level regulators, US OSHA or state levels, to say, hey, we're certified, maybe you can inspect someone else instead of us with your limited inspection budget? And so we're doing some work right now to see whether there's any impact on these. And in your questions or suggestions, we'd love to hear other outcomes that you think would be useful for your business for us to look at. Again, the only limitation for us is, like, can we find systematic data across companies that have adopted and have not adopted to be able to look at that over time? So that's sort of the quick and dirty answer to question 2.
Lovely, thanks, Mike. It's early evening here in the UK, so everybody who wasn't working from home has come home and switched on their internet. So I've just turned my camera off to preserve bandwidth. But I think I'll come back to the poll because I'm conscious of time. So hang on, Chloe, and I'll ask you to launch it again in a second. But the other point that I wanted to make, and again, this is, I think, one of the, I don't know, the myths or misconceptions about certification. A lot of organizations think that certification is the end of the journey, that once they've got certification, that's it, job done. And of course, that is completely missing the point. The certification is only the start of the journey, and the value of certification and implementing your management system is the continuous improvement that it focuses on and drives within your organization to really unlock those benefits that Mike has found in terms of the research. And we often get asked, well, we can continue to do that. 45001 talks about continuous improvement. So why does certification make a difference on that? And I think there are a number of key things. I think one of the things, and I've certainly found this when I've been running organizations and implementing management systems, and I'm sure Dave has experience of this as well. When you're living and breathing it every day, you kind of stop to see it. It starts to become invisible. It's like a smell, isn't it? If a smell's there all the time, you start to not notice it. And actually, certification, having somebody independent come in really ensures that you're looking at it with fresh eyes and seeing whether it's still delivering. But of course, our auditors are going out to hundreds and potentially even thousands of different organizations, and they're seeing what other organizations are doing, what's working, what's not, what the challenges are, and they bring all of that to you, to your organization, to your certification. And you know, that's one of the things that we get feedback time and time again from our clients in terms of the value of certification, is that knowledge that comes with the auditor, because they're seeing this in all sorts of organizations across all sorts of industry, get some really amazing cross-industry experience and knowledge being shared. And of course, the other thing, you know, that we sometimes forget, coming back to one of the benefits that you in our poll have suggested, and certainly we hear back, is you know, it does help with compliance with legislation, with regulation. And we know that legislation can change and it can get updated, and sometimes we miss that. And again, your auditor is there to help and support you and identify that and make sure that your processes are picking those changes up, and you're making the necessary changes. So I really did want to emphasize that, because we hear this a lot, kind of people think, oh, certification, there you go, that's it, job done. And it's absolutely not. It's really only the start of the journey. So if we want to just launch the next poll, the last poll, please, Chloe. I'd really like to hear from you. So we've asked the question about what you think the benefits are of 45001. We've asked the question about your implementation. So we'd really love to hear about whether your organisation has sought certification, or whether you're seeking it, or whether it's not on your agenda. So again, the same format. Have you got certification, and have you got it across your entire organisation? Perhaps you're on your journey and you've started it and you've got certification on 1 or 2 sites. You haven't started, but it is in your plan. You weren't planning to, but you're reconsidering, having listened to this session, or you have no plan for certification. So it'd really be interesting to hear, and that gives me a chance. And we have had a few questions come in, so I'm just going to have a look at those while we do the poll. And Dave, you've got a couple of questions coming your way. Mike, perhaps when we go on to the next slide, you can answer John's question about when the research will be published. So if we can have the results and move on to the next slide, then we've got some time for questions. Okay, so a kind of a similar picture actually in terms of the implementation, which makes sense. We've still got some people who need a bit more convincing in terms of the benefits of certification, but I'm sure we can make that case. So thank you very much. So Mike, would you like to explain about the publication of the research?
Sure, thank you. So on the upper left-hand side here of this slide is the name of, this is currently a working paper. It's under a peer review process, but the working paper is itself available at this URL provided, the ssrn.com, abstract equals 3988416. That will bring you to the paper. So you can read the paper as it is in progress. Of course, in the peer review process, things might change, but this is at least the latest version will always be posted there. Just a final plug for this research translation micro website that we created at www.hbs.edu/working conditions. A doctoral student and an RA of mine have created this website with me, where we are summarizing academic research that addresses working conditions, including occupational health and safety, and also other issues in operations and in supply chains. So there's about 40 or 50 articles summarized there in lay terms. So it is meant to open up the academic research, which is often described in jargon and behind firewalls. This is a free resource meant for managers and the media. So I encourage you to check that out, and you can follow, there's a little Twitter thing, you can follow me. I always announce when new things are posted there, and my contact details are in the lower left. Thanks so much.
Lovely, thanks, Mike. So Dave, you've been called out specifically for this question. It's all right. I think you've got this. So, in your experience, how have you overcome site or organisational leaders who stand in the way of advancing along the journey to certification or wider operational risk management?
Yeah, I know that that's a question we often get a lot, and again, it comes down to making a strong business case for a safe workplace. Sometimes dollar values speak volumes when you talk about the average cost of a workers' compensation claim and lost production
Mm,
and lost productivity, and
mm,
perhaps the negative backlash that can result from a reportable injury. Those are important aspects to make. Uh, I usually work with the EHS leaders on sites, but then if need be, happy to always have conversations with leadership. And it
mm,
is important when they're implementing ISO 45001 and previously 18,001, but especially 45,001. Leadership and commitment is vital to
mm,
the success of a management system for safety and to get certified. And so we at least have a process within BSI where we do leadership training to emphasize the importance of safety in the workplace and their roles in
mm.
supporting certification processes. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think so. Lovely. Thank you. And I'm just having another look here. So, Alex, it's great to hear that you're convinced. And I think you've made an important point. You know, we've heard very clearly the benefits from certification, both from independent research and what our clients tell us. But it's not necessarily the right journey for every organization, you know, and that's worth bearing in mind. You know, a lot of organizations do. A lot of it is often pushed down the supply chain. It becomes part of your ability to bid for work.
Mhm.
But it's not necessarily, it's not the be all and end all. You know, the standards are the best practice. They're a tool, and it's like any tool. You know, you can use it a bit, some of it, all of it. You know, but to really get the benefit, you need to use it properly, and you get additional benefit through the certification. But Alex, yeah, I understand that coming through. So let me have a look and see. Stanislas, I'm not entirely sure the question that you're asking. Maybe it'll make sense to Mike or Dave. A regulator cannot answer this question, but are we promoting the use of it? So I'm curious who the we are. Feel free to add a little bit more detail, Stanislas, into the chat, and we'll come back to that, unless Mike or Dave have understand where Stanislas is coming from for that one.
Well, I've not seen the question.
No,
Uh,
that's as written. So
I don't know of any regulators in the US who are promoting the adoption of safety of these of any particular safety management system
right.
certification. There have been efforts overseas. When I lived in Singapore, I believe the government or the industry association was subsidizing the certification process in order to encourage companies to pursue it. I'm not aware of any such activities in the US, but I could just
Well,
be overlooking them.
I could also add that there have been executive orders signed in the past to support implementation of environmental and safety management systems within federal agencies. So you would think that by default that if they're encouraging their own agencies to implement these types of systems, that would transcend over into private industry as well.
great, thank you. So to Dave from a David, and I hinted that there was a question here. So David's question is really around thinking about maybe sort of larger multi-site organizations.
Mhm.
Do you think it's better to have an overarching system that kind of integrates, you know, all of those elements, or is it better to have something that is specific to each of the maybe individual sites, or perhaps more relevantly if it's different legal entities?
Well, different legal entities is an interesting nuance, but I've seen a lot of global corporate organizations that have had global safety management systems, and then are requiring or pushing those management system requirements out to individual sites as well. And if you're looking at getting certified, there's two different pathways in which you could do that. You can do that as a corporate or entity-wide certification, which is certified at the large corporate level, and then individual sites can become rolled up into that certification, or individual sites can certify as well. My feeling is that if a lot of organizations, individual sites are already aligning with corporate requirements, that it starts at the top. It starts with a corporate level management system and then rolls on down to each individual site. But
Right.
every entity is different, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. But that, that's part of kind of the process, your implementation, what's working. That's something that, if you are interested in certification, we help you with, what's going to work, what's going to be best. I'm conscious of time, and we've come to the top of the hour, but Stanislas has very kindly clarified, and Stanislas represents an organization that regulates industry, and they're promoting the use of 45,001 on the offshore on offshore energy. So thank you, Stanislas. So and I certainly see that globally. I don't see anywhere. Australia is slightly different. There is a link to legislation, but certainly regulators will promote it because it's a best practice tool. So I'm conscious that we haven't got to all of your questions. I will take a note of them and answer any that we haven't got to. So it's just my pleasure and I'm going to try and get my camera on, hopefully it doesn't crash, to say a huge thank you to Dave and Mike for joining us today. And thank you for all of you for joining us. I hope that you found this beneficial and useful. You will get a recording, as I say, early next week. Please do fill out the survey. We love to hear your feedback. We want to make sure that these are valuable to you, so feedback is really important. And if you want any more information, do please visit the BSI website. So without further ado, thank you, Dave. Thank you, Mike. Thank you to our listeners, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
It's a pleasure. Take care.
Thank you.